different kinds of international law disciplines. So now I'm writing my thesis also. I've already finished my doctorate, and now I will attend, I think, next year for my profession. So that's all. And now, today I will, as you said, I will explain about the limits of refugee protection. First of all, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to this organization and of this conference, and the kind dear president and dear participant and listeners also. As I said I will deal with today with the issue of refugee, which is always subject of the international law, but it's a very huge subject, and we also today mention the small part of and a certain angle of this subject, the legal limits of refugee protection. Actually, states are responsible for protecting their citizens, the citizens' rights. But when governments are unable or unwilling to do this, people have many serious threats. Because of that reason, they have to move their country because they have no choice, and looking for safety places to live. At that point, if it happens, another country has to take some steps to ensure the refugees' basic rights that are respected in international law. At that point, the international protection of refugees law and the rights of asylum law are born. Especially in Geneva Convention of the United Nations are the first general convention at that point, at that subject, and it set forth the status of the refugees very systematically and basically, and also its protocols also make the same effects and basic instrument of the protection system. It's also complemented by the international, regional treaties and declarations also, but we all the time said the Geneva Convention and its protocols are the basic and the core principles on that subject. At that point, maybe there need to be clarify some points and definitions about migrant and asylum seeker and refugee, because all the time these definitions are sometimes could be mixed by people, and they have so thin lines between them. So when we look at the refugee is someone who has to move and left his or her country because of a threat to his or her freedom or life, and there is a serious threat. Asylum seeker is someone who is left his country for international protection, but not every asylum seeker have recognized as a refugee. In some countries, it's a legal term for a person who has applied for a refugee, but not received a final decision. And migrants are a different part of this subject, because they choose to go to another country. They choose to leave their origin country. So they go for different reasons, for education, for family reunion, or for work. So there are different kinds of reasons to left their origin. And also migrants have continued to protect by their origin states. This is the difference. When we look at the international instruments, we see lots of declarations, lots of conventions, and lots of regional or domestic laws about the rights of refugees. As I said before, Geneva Convention and its protocols are the core instruments, but Cartagena Declaration for African countries, or Arab Convention on Regulation, the status of refugees in Arabic countries, Bangkok Principles for African and Asian countries, Ashgabat Declaration for the Organization of the Member States of Islamic Cooperation, and European Union also has lots of instruments to protect refugees and sole asylum rights. Especially in European Union, they want to create a common asylum seeker and asylum seeker and refugee system based on full and inclusive application of Geneva Convention, and they create lots of institutions only to protect these kinds of statues. For example, Frontex and European Asylum Support Office are the new institution only to make some, how can I say, provide the operational support for these kinds of statues. So every states and unions take care about this situation, and they take the core principles to make their new designated instruments. We also see another instruments to protect refugees, like International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and Convention on the Disabled Rights of persons who are disabled, such like this. So, and lots of convention has rights belong to refugees and asylum seekers. At that point, the human rights law is the main part of this process, because the starting point at that point is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In the human rights law also protect the refugees and asylum seekers, and it's the main basic view is all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So this view affect the refugees and asylum seekers also. Under the human rights law, the states have to make some guarantee. They are forced to make guarantees that were affirmed, because cannot be restricted or suspended rights for any reasons. So it depends on this declaration. All forms, when we look at all forms of this regional and international and domestic instruments, we see the will to protect refugees and asylum seekers, and they start from the same point, and they have the similar purposes. It's clear that they have to, the states have important roles and responsibilities to protect this right. They have to make and build international instruments and asylum system. They have managed to border. They regulate the entry of the refugees and asylum seekers. They receive refugees and asylum seekers in a systematical way, determines who are asylum seekers, who are refugees, making procedures fair and equitable, efficient, and respecting the rights of their dignity also, are the duties of states. But of course, when they make these responsibilities, they don't make they have to protect themselves also and their citizens inside their borders. So there isn't any limitless rights for everybody. They can otherwise, if they don't do this, they can harm the interests of their citizens when they want to comply with the international law. Because of that reason, signatory states of the international conventions have a reservation right, opportunity relating to some particular topics that they need to take. It depends on their culture, it depends on their law, but they have a reservation choice. So when we look at the international convention and customary law, we encounter some situations that may justify the states to limit the refugees' rights. When we look at them, these are for public order, these are for health, these are to protect other rights. So we can say some guarantees may be derogated from under specific conditions. States may be derogated the right to uphold the public order, to uphold for health, or uphold or to protect the other rights. So these are the these are not the they are not accepted as a violation of the international law. And also refugees and asylum seekers also have duties to respect and abide the laws of the host country. For example, in Turkey, in Turkish law, restricts the immovable act of foreigners, or foreigners cannot perform any profession, whatever they want. It's restricted by codes and authorities. So same approach applies for refugees also and the asylum seekers because of their stature. And these limitations are not accepted and considered by the violation of the rights arising from international law. As I said,
Dennis, sorry, you have only 2 minutes left.
Okay, it will finish. Sorry, it will finish. In the Code of Turkish Law of Foreigners and International Protection, it imposes certain obligation on persons who have applied for or hold on international protection status. So failure to comply with these obligations may limit their enjoyment of their rights, excluding education and health. So they have to obey the rules in the host state. Otherwise, they lose some of their rights. So unless the limitation of the rights of refugees at the end, if it is not arbitrary, it will be considered in accordance with the international law, because this is necessary both to protect the citizens of the host country and also not to violate their domestic law. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, and it was very informative. You will stay with us because there may be some question, including questions by myself. Now we'll go to Aslıgül SARIKAMİŞ, and her topic is the EU's humanitarian aid policy and refugee crisis, contested humanitarian principles. Aslıgül, like Deniz, please, like a minute or two, introduce yourself to us. Aslıgül, we don't hear you. Open your
voice.
Now, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Now, yes, we do.
Okay.
I said, kindly introduce yourself in a minute or two and start your topic.
Thank you very much. My name is Aslıgül. I am a lecturer at Department of International Relations in Selçuk University. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all organizers of this conference Thank you for this online opportunity of online presentation. Today, the topic of my presentation is the EU's refugee crisis and EU-Turkey refugee deal. Our colleague Deniz look at the refugee crisis from the international law perspective. I will look at this refugee crisis from European perspective, and especially I will talk about the linkage between EU's humanitarian aid policy and the refugee crisis. As we all know that Arab uprising led to the massive refugee flows to European Union countries, and this massive flow of refugees led to the crisis for the European Union because EU member states were completely unprepared to deal with political and humanitarian aspects of this crisis. And although this crisis has been called refugee crisis, there are also different definitions of this crisis. This crisis turned into, for instance, a crisis of a solidarity. It turns into a security crisis, and it has also become a humanitarian crisis. It was, from the viewpoint of the most of EU member states, this refugee crisis is considered as a security crisis, and this refugee crisis was discussed in terms of the words invasion, security threat, and they focus on the defense of their borders. And also this crisis became a crisis of the European Union, because when we talk about European Union presented itself as a community of values. It is based on the respect for human rights, rule of law, democracy, and human dignity. But after this crisis, as I said, European politicians focus on the security aspect of this crisis. They didn't play a political role in the solution of this crisis. And consequently, right-wing parties, anti-migrant discourses gained popularity. And when you look at the public opinion, when you look at the European citizens, this refugee crisis turned into an anti-migrant discourse, and local people, local governments, they increase these problems, and this crisis led to the populist anti-immigrant discourse at the Europe. But when we look at the EU member states, this crisis also was a solidarity crisis. As we can say that refugee crisis is not only a problem of the refugees, it turns into a security crisis from the viewpoint of the EU member state, and but they can't present a coherent and unified approach for this problem. Member states they look at their national policies, and this led to the solidarity crisis within the European Union. Although, especially new member states, they enjoy the benefits of European integration, such as free movement of people by means of Schengen, although they enjoy the single market, although they enjoy the borderless Europe, when they are faced with refugee crisis, especially new member states, Central and Eastern European countries, they are unwilling to share the burden of this crisis. But in addition to these aspects, in fact, at its core, this is a humanitarian crisis. Millions of the refugees were at the doors of the European Union, and millions of refugees suffer from the civil war in Syria, in refugee. But unfortunately, this humanitarian aspect of this crisis was neglected by EU politicians. But when we look at the EU's discourse, when you look at the speeches of the EU politicians, they always portray EU as a humanitarian actor. Remember that EU was given Nobel Peace Prize, and EU differentiated itself from other actors. EU presented itself as a normative actor. And when you look at the EU documents, when you look at the EU's treaties, EU mentioned about the humanitarian principles. And there's a document that there's a European consensus on humanitarian aid, and this consensus states the humanitarian principles of the EU's humanitarian aid. And EU says that EU has been leading humanitarian actor in world politics, and in delivering humanitarian aid, EU rely on the principles of the humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. This principle of independence is very important because this principle says that humanitarian aid should be independent of other political, economic, and security objectives. The humanitarian aid should aim saving human lives and alleviation of the human suffering. But when we look at the practice, there is a gap between the rhetoric and the practice, especially dealing with this refugee crisis. EU has not handled with this crisis in a humanitarian manner. On the contrary, EU prefer refugee deterrence over the international protection obligations instead of protection of the rights of the refugees as stated by our colleague Deniz, which are stated in Geneva Convention. EU prefers refugee deterrence approach, and this refugee deterrence approach was in contrast to humanitarian principles because this refugee deterrence prevents refugees to access member states, and this refugee deterrence policy means containment of refugees in countries of transit, and by this way EU try to constrain and deter the refugees, and also EU established Frontex for maintaining its borders, and also EU increased its spending for the camps. And when we look at the EU's efforts, EU put too much energy on controlling borders, and by this way EU in fact apply pushback policies, and these pushback policies are in fact the violation of right to asylum, because this pushback policies mean the risk of refoulement, and these pushback policies of EU member states, especially the Greece and Italy, because Greece was under the massive flow from the Syrians. Italy, there was a massive flow from the African, especially West Africans. They wanted to go to Italian borders, and Greece and Italy, they sometimes apply pushback policies against the refugees. And when you look at the reports of the NGOs, European NGOs, these European NGOs, they prepare a report about these pushback policies between Greece and Turkey and Italian African countries. And when you look at the discussions at European parliaments, the members of the European parliaments, the NGOs, they indicated that sometimes EU member states use illegal practices to secure their national borders. On the basis of these points, we can say that EU externalize and outsource this migration. This is the solution of Europe for dealing with the humanitarian crisis. And this externalization or outsourcing migration was in fact in line with Fortress Europe approach, and EU could emphasize outsourcing refugees in neighborhood countries, and EU neglected humanitarian principles. EU externalized its obligations to refugees to neighborhood countries, and EU delegate its responsibility to protect refugees to transit countries. And on this basis, EU signed take-back or readmission agreements with African countries. And in this context, I think that this Turkey-EU refugee statement of 2016 was an example of this externalization of the refugee protection policy of the European Union. This was a statement between European Union and Turkey. It was signed in 2016, and this also indicates this is the refugee deterrence. This is in line with refugee deterrence policy of the European Union, and this, I think, that shows the externalization of the refugee protection. When we look at this Turkey refugee deal, this deal aims to prevent the irregular migrants from Turkey to Greek islands, and there's a resettlement policy. For every Syrians being returned to Turkey from Greek islands, another Syrian will be resettled to the European Union. And to support this deal, EU was committed to provide 6 billion euros to Turkey. But when you look at this agreement, again, this is another deterrence mechanism which aims to keep migrants and asylum seekers in Turkey. And again, this statement aims to minimize the the apply of asylum seeker from the Greece, because according to this statement, irregular migrants who arrive Greek islands from Turkey and who don't apply for asylum or asylum may be returned to Turkey. And with this agreement, Turkey had to shoulder a great burden, and the supplying Syrian refugees became a problem of the Turkey. And in relation to this policy, EU implemented Hotspot Approach in Greece. And today in Greece, there are 5 hotspot refugee camps in Greece, and also there are 4 camps in Italy. But these hotspot camps are in very bad condition, and although this agreement led to the decrease of irregular migration, this agreement led to the other humanitarian crisis. And when you look at these camps, as I said, these camps were very crowded, and the conditions were very hard. And in September, there was a fire in one of these camps, and thousands of people had to live in these very bad conditions. This is the EU's approach, and when we look at the EU's approach, we can say that EU tried to solve this problem by externalizing or outsourcing refugee problems, and rather than dealing with humanitarian aspect of this crisis, EU tried to solve this problem with money, because in addition to Turkey, EU provides humanitarian aid to the Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt. And when you look at the EU documents, EU stated that EU allocated more than 20 million euros for these countries which are affected by Syrian refugee crisis. And as I said, there was a specific instrument for these refugees, EU Facility for Refugees, and EU has a specific program, Emergency Social Safety Net Program, Conditional Cash Transfer for Education. Yes, these are important programs. Yes, these are important financial instruments, but these financial instruments did not solve the essence of the problem. Despite the hospitality of the Turkish government, despite the Turkish refugees' access to health, education services, most of the refugees in Turkey, they want to go to the European countries. They want to make asylum applications to the northern European countries. And but as I said, offering money, providing financial assistance to refugee hosting countries has not solved the problem. And I think that this is not compatible with EU's values and EU's norms, because EU look at the issue from the interest-based perspective. EU, although EU stated that it's a humanitarian actor.
Aslıgül, sorry to interrupt. You have only 1 more minute to add.
Okay. we can say that although EU has a duty to protect refugee people in accordance with Geneva Convention, the EU's with this crisis, EU in fact undermines humanitarian principles, because EU shift responsibility to outward country, and EU outsource migration to the third countries, and by this way EU countries turn their backs to their international commitments, and they pursue interest-based approaches, and they neglect humanitarian principles, and rather than solving this problem by legal ways, rather than opening legal ways for refugees, for asylum seekers, EU take interest-based approaches and prefer to externalize these approaches and put them into the host countries. And EU look at how to stop people entering the European Union. This is the end of my presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Aslıgül, thank you very much. It is very interesting, and I'm quite sure it raises many questions. Here we see lots of contradiction, really a lot of contradiction between practice and theory, with the principles, declared principles, and real practice which is going on. Okay, great. Now we will be with our third panelist, İbrahim AKKUÇ, Post-Modernist Transformation in Political Science, the case of Iraq and Lebanon. Okay, İbrahim, be careful, I'm Iraqi. So be very careful what you say about Iraqis.
Okay, don't worry, I'm going to talk about theoretical aspect of it. Yeah, okay. You can hear me clearly, that's fine.
Okay, go ahead.
By the way, I'm a PhD candidate in UK. I completed my master's degree in Middle Eastern Politics in School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. And I focus on Middle Eastern politics, political thought of the West and the East, and Turkish politics as my interest areas.
Great.
Okay. I prepared my presentation for 20 minutes, but unfortunately you said that it's going to just...
that's what I was told.
Yeah.
That's what I was told by Sakarya University.
Okay, I will ask you to make a favor for a couple of minutes. Anyway.
No problem.
Let me go first. Okay. I'm going to talk about the theoretical aspect of this issue, how we are going to look at the problems, particularly in Lebanon and Iraq. I will talk about some analytical points that would help us to understand the case better. I hope so. In the beginning, I will talk about theory. Okay, as has been observed, there have been numerous protests in Middle East resembling each other and making similar demands such as economic transparency and political efficiency in very identical methods by benefiting from the social media. For instance, in Lebanon and Iraq, the people took to the street to protest against the economic and political predicaments their governments have been facing for a long time. It has been observed in Lebanon and Iraq, the political elites were discharged by their own people who came from different political, cultural, even ideological backgrounds, by their own people who came from, through the current technological opportunities in social media. There are tremendous similar content, demands, and method in a way how politics is made, and in particular how resistance is shown. It is a post-modernist transformation in tradition of political resistance that contains ideology-free masses, non-existence of charismatic leader, spontaneous gatherings, distant dissemination of information, and similar demands, such as clean water, sustainable electric, effective public services, and certain degree of dignity. So why Iraq and Lebanon? Because Iraq and Lebanon are especially noteworthy by virtue of their governance systems that are defined by sharply delineated sectarian identities and political organizations. Deliberate foreign manipulation formalized these sectarian power-sharing systems with France in Lebanon nearly a century ago, and US in Iraq after 2003 invasion. Thus, some question came to mind. For instance, why did these protests look like similar? What sort of organizational method they used? Could they bring transformative changes to the region or to the countries I mentioned? This analysis endeavors to make an attempt to deploy a distinct approach by which there will be an opportunity to answer these leading three significant questions. Is there any alternative approach to comprehend the ongoing political disruption in the region, particularly in Eastern countries? Some social analysts argue that social values are significant determinants of political values on which political institutions are established. To this approach, what should government do and how it should be operated lies at the heart of the political culture that determines the relations between social and political values. Related to cultural and religious cleavages are the criteria on which divide the member of the community and sub-community into groups. These relevant cleavages are those which divide the members into groups with important political differences at specific time and spaces. These social cleavages are accepted as a basis on which some dichotomies such as church and state, urban-rural, center and periphery, modern-traditional, secular-conservative are determined. To put it differently, this approach assumes that social values do not only designate shared norms on which political enlightenments are formed, but also they are the basis on which the political conflicts are built. Even though this method might work in many examples, it seems that it would not be a determined method that will explain the recent rallies whose languages, methods, its demands are similar than their differences. In consequences, the need for a more explanatory method that account for how discrepant ideological groups could come together, raise similar voices. Regarding this, the other social scientists support that we live in a period in which the way how politics is made, politics is exercised, and the resistance is organized have transformed dramatically. These political shifts are not regional but cross-regional in the world today. To put it in theoretical terms again, the new method of resistance relies on the theory that endorses the rejection of accepted theories, dissent subjects, a thinking of theory of hegemony, as well as rejecting class, race, ethnicity, and gender based on subordinating dichotomies, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago. It's clear that the way how resistance is organized leads towards a postmodernist pattern of politics, in which no charismatic leader for the masses, no pioneering revolutionary coordination for the demonstrations, no solid driving ideology, no ideal women type request, no tape-based and conference-oriented dissemination of information. However, organization of these groups rely on social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, which played a vital role to galvanize free ideology mind for demonstration to express their grievances and dissents. This type of resistance is also different in terms of its demands that focus on decentralized and democratic governance, social justice, satisfactory political participation in policymaking process, adequate distribution of income, and sustainable public services with hands of qualified politicians, that part is very important, who serve on the basis of their merits. As keeping all said in mind, having a closer look at the events in the region will provide us additional evidence to indicate how political power is exercised in post-modernist pattern, in particular in Lebanon and Iraq. As for Iraq, the leaderless protesters came together via social media, put to the street on the 1st of October 2019. A date was determined by civil activists on social media, spreading through central and southern provinces of Iraq to protest high unemployment, inadequate public services, and governmental corruption among the members of the governmental officers. Particularly, they complained of high unemployment and poor public services, such as power cut, lack of clean and drinkable water, rather than ideological and sectarian issues. For example, they asked that although Iraq has the world's fourth largest proven oil reserves, why the country's leadership could not find solution to their endemic problems. Initially, their demands were limited. By the time goes on, they began to make more comprehensive demands, such as resignation existing government and overhaul the whole political system. Demonstrators insist on new political system that differs from the existing one that was formed in 2003 after the US-led invasion of Iraq, and that, according to many Iraqis, favors a certain individual and groups to enrich them and expand their influence over the governmental apparatus. Therefore, the leaderless protesters on November 11, 2009, issued a list of demands from Tahrir Square as following: stepping down and dissolving the government immediately, as well as swift election under the election committee to be chosen among the trustable politicians and not party-affiliated officers. That's something very important. Because of the pressure, the Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi and other senior politicians from different political parties and groups declared that in the case of setting up suitable legislative ground, Iraq would hold a new election in short run. In this direction, Adil Abdul Mahdi resigned on the 6th of May 2020, and later on, Muhammad Alawi Adnan al-Zuhri failed to form a convincing government. And in the end, Mustafa al-Kadhimi was nominated by the Iraq President Bahram Salih to form a government that seems relatively stable to handle the process. All in all, Iraqi people from Shiite and Sunni groups came together through social media without a certain leader, as well as pre-organized blueprint. Did not want to experience any lack of leadership in the government, as well as urge for adequate public services, transparent economy and political management, and new economic opportunities to protect human dignity as maintaining their lives. As you can see, there is no any demands for sectarian and ideological requests from the people. That's very significant. As for the Lebanon is another Middle Eastern country that is politically divided among the sectarian groups. Although its political system tries to hold 18 different political communities together by relying on some consensual democracy, its official and administrations are mainly made of three significant religious groups: Sunnis, Christians, and Shiites. For example, the president and the chief of staff are Christian, while the prime minister is Sunni, and the president of the parliament is Shiite. Nevertheless, the pictures came from the Lebanon since October 17, 2009, seems this religious proportionate political system do not satisfy Lebanese people who took the street to protest newly proposed taxes in and around capital city Beirut. Again, the leaderless protesters blocked the highways, main roads, vital intersections in the Lebanese big cities were from all aspects of the society, which transcends the country's established religious and political divisions. Like in the case of Iraqi demonstrators, people went out to protest against mismanagement of economy, lack of basic services such as electricity, water, cleaning, health, education. And likewise, they demanded for accountable political system that is based on non-sectarian political affiliations. In this regard, demonstrators did not want to see some revision in the government. Instead, they pushed for a total change in the cabinet and the government, in which uncorrupted ministers would not be serving on the basis of their quality of service, not by way of their personal sectarian affiliations. Following the widespread demonstrations, Hariri government, now again prospective prime minister nominee, announced to resign after pressure made by the protesters who demand Lebanese politicians to set up a cabinet of independent experts who can lead the country out of the deepening financial crisis. Upon that, Michel Aoun, the president of Lebanon, said after the dissolve of the government, new ministers will be chosen for their political competencies, not for sectarian affiliations. To this end, Mustafa Abid, Hassan Diab, as a technocrats, failed to provide a convincing government as well. As a result, Diab became the current caretaker prime minister of Lebanon. As it has been observed in Iraq case, even though people came to raise their voices against extra taxes, and demonstration in Lebanon turned out to be a direct criticism of the whole political system. In addition, it would not be wrong to advocate that Lebanese people would like to see a political system that will be managed around the democratic principles such as accountability, transparency, and non-sectarianism, not around sectarian and religious principles. Nevertheless,
Ibrahim, we are at the end of the time. I can give you 2 more minutes.
Yeah, 2 more minutes. Let me jump to the conclusion then. I think it will be better. I prepared my presentation for 20 minutes, so this is a mistake. Yeah. Okay. Concluding remarks. Here it's noteworthy to mention that the expression of anger and opposition has been shown against the domestic system, according to Husrev and Beck, due to mismanagement, favoritism, corruption, inadequate leadership, rather than because of outsiders, like in the early years of the mid-20th century. Furthermore, the protesters do not have different demands. Rather, they put emphasis on mostly bread and butter issues, such as electricity, clean water, environmental cleanup, cheaper and cleaner transportation. As for the organizational skills, two countries protesters benefit from the novel type of expression for showing their opposition and their demands for transparency, accountability in political and economic management, participation in policy-making process, and sustainability in public services. Last 1 minute. In connection with this, justice, freedom, and human dignity rather than identity issues that based on cultural and religious cleavages I mentioned in the beginning became the flashpoint of the protesters in these countries. Lastly, as for the possible impacts of this demonstration, it is much likely that the result will be open-ended. That could lead to emerge of hybrid regimes that cannot be clearly distinguished as a consolidated democracy or autocracy for extended period. Nevertheless, it is necessary to say that despite of the protester demands have not been institutionalized yet, during the demonstration apparently many voices are heard, and it is indicative of the pluralistic space from which they send their voices to local and international community. Thank you very much for your listening to me. Yeah, I came to my end. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. It is interesting, and I hope we have some questions at the end. I personally have a question later on, and now we will go to Tuğba. She's speaking about Lebanese national identity crisis based on West Beirut. That is to say, Tuğba, you will be focusing on the national identity crisis only among the people in West Beirut. Is that right?
No. West Beirut is a movie, and I will try to explain national identity crisis by referring to the movie.
Okay, good. Continue. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I am Tuğba ALTUN. I graduated from International Relations Department from Yıldırım Beyazıt University, and currently I am a master student in Middle East Technical University in Middle East Department. Let me share with you.
Okay, continue. Tuğba, continue. Is there a problem with Tuğba? Yeah.
There's a connection problem, I think.
There's a problem. Are you okay now, Tuğba? You can continue. Let's please kindly everybody turn off your microphone so that Tuğba can. Okay, Tuğba, now you should go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we can hear you.
I will talk about the Lebanese national identity crisis.
Okay.
Yes. Firstly, I will briefly talk about Lebanon. Then the part will be about the movie of West Beirut. This was a part of Ottoman, and after the under the
Yes. Tuğba, continue. You seem to have some problem.
in 19
Now it is okay. Talk, please.
Lebanese Republic
Okay. Tuğba Hanım, we seem...
Can you hear me?
I am hearing you, but I don't know the other people hearing you or not. I am hearing you.
I will.
Okay, continue.
Okay. In 1946, a fixed ratio for the Chamber of Deputies was decided: 6 Christians and 5 Muslims. In 1944, France agreed to transfer power to the Lebanese government, and after the independence, actually, the problems were continuing. In 1958, for example, when United Arab Republic was declared by Syria and Egypt, actually Lebanon wanted to be part of it, and a civil war broke out, and at the end, US Marine Forces came to solve the situation. We can see that Arab nationalists in Lebanon demanded to be part of this United Arab Republic. And before all of this Egypt and Syria's union, actually Lebanon demanded this because it was in 1975 the civil war broke out with Phalangelist armed attack against Palestinian passengers, and actually the West Beirut movie starts with this event. And after the civil war in 1989, Taif Accords was signed, and the president transferred power to the cabinet, and the number of Muslim representatives increased. Now I will continue with the Lebanese society topic. Lebanese political system is based on sectarianism since its establishment, and Lebanese constitution does not recognize division of power among the dominant religious community. Instead, there is the frame of pact of communal coexistence. Confessional system is created for guaranteeing political participation by all sects. It can be claimed that it is created with a good intention, maybe to be equal, but it caused more damage than expected, and because it led more divisions, people from all sects demand more, and they don't believe that this system is fair, and it treats equally to everyone. Also, family and religious ties got more important than national ones. Politics was dominated by families who took their power from feudalism, economic status, and a long-standing tradition of leadership, like Hariri family. And there are different segments of population, and differences are not only religious or sectarian. The groups, Shias, Christian, Muslims, Maronites, they have subgroups as political divisions. There is not only a national identity because people have roles before their Lebanese identity. A Lebanese was first a member of his family, then his village, his religious group, and finally he was a Lebanese. Also, political loyalties belong to individuals, not organizations. Yeah, it should be not belong to a person or a group. It should be belong to the government's institutions as a state. And before the civil war, different religious groups are divided economically too. Christians were controlling business and trade, and the Muslims mostly working as industrial workers, and Shiites were the poorest ones. And when the war began, those groups fight with each other and also fight within themselves. The gap between rich and poor is problematic among the sections. There is an economic and social gap, yes, in every group, but it is more concrete between Christians and Shiites. Also, power is distributed unequally. Christians are more powerful, although the Muslims are the majority, and they become political elites. Shiites mostly live in the southern part of the Lebanon, and it is considered as an undeveloped area and poor area. So Shiites are lack of political and economic power. When we talk about Lebanese identity, Lebanese people make a war over Lebanese history because they cannot agree on Lebanon's past and what it means. And actually, nationality and identity comes first from the history and culture. And Lebanese people have not historically identified themselves as Lebanese first. Different people attach different meaning to being a Lebanese. In the history books of Lebanon, the origins of the Lebanese people are the Phoenicians, and historian Kemal Talibi accepts Phoenicia as a fictionalized history, and it is used for creating national solidarity by the Lebanese people. There are people who deny Arab identity of Lebanon besides who accept the Arab origins. Phoenicia becomes an example of an invented tradition. The Phoenicia idea found ground among predominantly Christian middle class by promoting the image of the Lebanese as traders. The Sunnis believed that the Phoenicianist formula was a French imperialist conspiracy against Arab nationalism. So Sunni Muslims saw Lebanon as part of the greater Arab nation, not a separate nation. They thought also Phoenicians could come from Arabian Peninsula, but Lebanon is Arabic in speech and tradition, so Lebanese nationality should have included them too. Also, Arab nationalism has an Islamic side, and it is unacceptable for some Christians, but it's not a generalization. For example, Syrian Arab nationalism, which is created by Michel Aflaq and Ba'ath Party, they consider Islam as a component of the Arab nationalism because it is a cultural phenomena. And we see here a graph. It is from the study of sectarianism and counter-sectarianism in Lebanon by Population Studies Center report. And survey was done in 2008. And here we see that Druze are defining themselves as Lebanese more than others, and Sunnis and Shiites are more defining themselves with their religious identities. We see here that they don't the division, the separation among them. And when we talk about the West Beirut movie, it is written and directed by Ziad Dori. It is about the civil war that was broke out in Lebanon in 1975. It focused on more civilian side of the war. The movie refers to identities in Lebanon, and also it shows damage of war for people. And hostility between Muslims and Christians is demonstrated. The main characters are Tariq and his family, Hala and Riyad. Also friends of Tariq, May and Ömer. May is a Christian, and her Christian identity became problematic because she wear a cross, and when they visited some others, and also Ömer demand her to take off the necklace. And Ömer is Muslim, and his family is very religious. Also, movie tries to show to the identity problems of Lebanon. Also, the foreign influence is one of the crucial points of the movie. When the movie started, Tariq is in a French school, and when they sing national anthem in French, Tariq sing it in Arabic and got punishment from the teacher. And there are some quotes from the movie. The French School of Beirut is embodiment of the French mission. Let us not forget that France created your country, gave you your borders, and taught you peace. We created your civilization and your constitution. French education is the only way out of your primitive customs. We see that French impact still continues, and also as a Lebanese, these young people also could feel that even our country is not created by us; it is given by another country. Even our borders, civilization, constitution, education, also they see our customs as primitive, and even they thought that the peace is taught by Damas. And of course, this caused some solidarity problems because it is not there is not a ground to shape a national identity. in schools. Also, there are some quotes again. Tariq, one of the scenes, he says that there is no school today. Basel is closed. So the school is considered as a Basel prison. And also his father, when his father said that next summer we will be camping in France, he says that, no, thank you, I go to France every day. So school is like France in Lebanon. And when the 1975 attack happened, Hala and Riyad, his mother and father, talk about it, and who is behind this attack, Hala asked, and father said that I think the Israelis retaliated against the Palestinians. It is not our problem. So there is no Arab nationalism. They differentiate themselves from Palestinians. It is between Israelis and Palestinians. It is not. It doesn't concern us. But mother said it is our soil. So they differentiated Arabs, but patriotism is there. But Lina Hatip says that Lebanese cinema is keen on to victimize Lebanon and blame others for war. Lebanon considers the war as others on the land and always between some groups and superpowers. This everyone in Lebanese society became a victim of the war. The perpetrators were nowhere to be found. The war was now formally that of others on the land. And when we talk about the gap between the rich and poor and between sects, one of the scenes neighbors were arguing among them to go back to Sad. So we see here the gap between rich and poor and Shiites and Christians and refugees. There is division, separation, discrimination in the country. And when we talk
Tuğba,
about national identity,
I gave you,
there is,
Tuğba, I'm
yes,
sorry to interrupt you, but I gave you 2 more
okay,
minutes, but I will give you 1 more minute to wrap up, to conclude.
okay, I am going to finish. Yes, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
If anyone asks you your religion, say you are Lebanese. One of the characters says this quote, and because when the civil war started, there were people talking about it, and Christians and Muslims were cannot entering some neighborhoods. There were discrimination, so some people didn't want this, and they say you are Lebanese. And also Tariq and Riyad, when they talk about among themselves, again, Tariq showed hatred against towards Arabs, and his father said that you are an Arab yourself. And Tariq said, I am Lebanese, Phoenician. And his father actually proud of their Arabic culture, and but he said that it was long time ago. But we can see here that Tariq doesn't consider himself as an Arab. He wanted to be called as and believe that he is Lebanese and Phoenician. So we can see that there is an identity problem here. People differentiated themselves. They called themselves with their religious and political identities. It still continues and it causes more damage. And also there is foreign influence like France, Iran, and Saudi Arabia even. Lebanese, throughout the history of Lebanon, its people's loyalties to sects, religions, and political ideologies have never truly been overridden by loyalty to the nation. And it's the main problem of not having the solidarity. And they are right to ask that when will we all become only Lebanese? Because they don't, people are discriminated and they don't believe in themselves. They don't believe in with each other. So when they called all of them without discrimination Lebanese, it will be a better country for them. And
Thank,
thank you for listening. It's ended
uh,
my
t-
presentation.
Tuğba, thank you very much. And it was also very lively. Now let's go to the questions. And I would wait for any questions from other people. We are waiting for some questions. While we are waiting for some questions, if there is, let me start a question for Deniz. Deniz, well, I used to be interpreter in Canada. I was working Canada Refugee Board, And there is always the juries try to define who is Geneva Convention, who is, who can be considered a refugee according to the Geneva Convention. Is there any difference in your mind between, say, what is the criteria applied in Europe and the one in North America? Or is there a clear-cut criteria? Because in many cases, the people were really economic. They came there, they were not refugees. They were economic refugees, not Geneva, or what they call it, convention refugees. So how we can make this line? How can we draw the line?
Actually, sorry, I couldn't hear some of the questions, some parts of the questions because of the connection, I think. But in general, I understand that you're asking me what is the difference between the states' process on Geneva Convention, I think. The process
Deniz,
of Geneva Convention.
Kindly listen to me. How can we differentiate? This is convention refugee and this is economic refugee. What are the criteria?
Actually, for the Geneva Convention, if you will be accepted, if you want to be accepted as a refugee, you have some criteria that the convention set forth. These are, you have to be you have to confront some forces in your country to your religious, to your freedoms, your policies about the government or something like that. So because of that reasons, you have a pressure on your own by the state where you are living or where you have a connection. So you have to move your country because of trade, because you have no choice to stay, you have no choice to go out from your country. If you don't go, you have a big and serious threat to your freedom and your rights. So this is the legal framework of Geneva Convention. But in this convention, as you know, there are some reservations that the states accept. So Turkey, for example, when the Turkey signed this convention, it has two reservations accepted. One of them is the people coming from Europe are the refugees, and the other is the time limit. In 1970, 67th protocol, we have no more accepted time limit, but we have still accept the reservation which the people coming from Europe accepted as a refugee. So
thank you very much.
Refugee.
Yes, go ahead.
The economic refugee.
Yeah, go ahead. Just 30 seconds. Go ahead. 30 more seconds. You can go ahead.
Okay, the economic refugee or the climate refugee, or the new types of refugee, are different. They are not determined in this criteria. But if you have, of course, a pressure to your freedoms and to your rights, you will be accepted as a refugee. But if you accept it as a refugee also, you have to work. But we don't accept this kinds of group as an economic refugee.
Thank you very much. Now we go to Aslıgül. Aslıgül, you said EU countries try to, instead of pursuing humanitarian principles, their declared humanitarian principles, they try to deal with it by securitizing it or externalizing it. Aslıgül, the question is this. Isn't that how Turkey deals with it? Isn't that how many countries deal with it? Don't you think what you call a refugee issue has a security dimension for every host country?
Yes, I think that it is a security dimension, but compared to European countries, at first, Turkey has a more humanitarian approach. Turkey opened borders to the Syrian refugees. Yes, I agree with you that it has a security dimension, but the problem is that European countries put too much emphasis on security aspect. They put too much emphasis on controlling their borders, but they disregard the humanitarian aspect. And I talk about externalization of this problem. By this way, they try to prevent arrival of people to the European land, and by this way, they prevent people to apply asylum. They don't, for example, Turkey is a host country, Lebanon is a host country. They want to keep these people in these host countries. They try to prevent their arrival to the European soil. By this way, they prevent their asylum applications, and by this way, they avoid the international obligation to protect refugees. Yes, it is the security dimension, but as I said, EU focus too much on the security aspect, and EU avoids its international obligations to protect these refugees. Especially, EU had a very negative attitude towards the asylum applications, and as I said, at first Turkey pursued more humanitarian approach, yeah. But currently it is hosting around 4 million refugees.
That's and, right.
Turkey also take into account the security aspect of policies, but okay. As I said, Turkey is a more open door policy approach to the humanitarian.
Thank you very much, Aslıgül. And now we go to İbrahim Bey. İbrahim, you spoke about the case of Iraqi and Lebanese refugees. You said the emphasis were on high unemployment, electricity, services, corruption, inefficiency of the administration. And I just wanted to tell you that there was a common emphasis in both demonstrations on Iran as being the main cause of this. So in both Lebanese and Iraqi cases. So there is a political dimension, by the way. And by the way, in Iraq, here the government says, those pro-government says, these are American-directed demonstrations. It is American engineered, and it is politically motivated. So I don't know, what's your reading on that, Ibrahim?
Okay, thank you, Osman, by the way. First of all, I want to say that depends on from which way you are looking to the case. If you are looking to, from the cultural perspective to the problems, of course, what you said is right. The cultural and religious factors are very important in galvanizing of all these demonstrations. The people might tell to you on the street, okay, look, we have American-affiliated governments, and they just stop us to go further in economy, in politics, and other areas. But I want to just look at the case from different perspective. I want to bring a different, let's say, the approach by which we can understand the case, let's say, the more humanitarian case of the people. Because if you look at the interviews, if you look at all the reports actually written on what these demonstrators said, they say they're just mentioning about some basic needs. They say justice, freedom, and human dignity. The flashpoint points are basically in this case are just emerging as a justice, freedom, and human dignity. Of course, what you said, is it right? Yes. There are some cultural and ideological points and factors that drive people to make demonstration against their governments, but that depends absolutely on which way you are looking at the problem. If you are analyst embracing a cultural approach, of course, what you said is right. But if you are a kind of researcher who are looking at it from political economy perspective, what I said is right. Yeah, depends on the stand of the researchers. You might come up with two different conclusions. That's absolutely up to you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I appreciate. Now we go to Tuğba. Tuğba Hanım, you mentioned the crisis of identity in Lebanon, and then you said this invented identity. Isn't that the problem of all post-Sykes-Picot or First World War nation states in the Middle East? In Iraq, we have an imagined identity. There is no Iraq before 1921. There is no Turkey before the establishment of the Republic of Turkey. All nationalism, whether it's ethnic-based or region-based, is uninvented, or as what you call is called imagined community, isn't it? So you said Lebanese emphasize their Phoenician background. Is this confined to the Christian or even Muslims consider? Because to my knowledge, Muslims identify as Arab nationalists.
Yes. I said that the Phoenicians idea is accepted by Christians, but also, yes, but Muslims mostly consider Phoenician idea as a, as I said, French conspiracy.
That's right.
But of course, there are people who consider themselves as Lebanese and Phoenicia also. They believe in Arab nationalism, or not just Arab, they want to be only as Lebanese, like patriotism, not general Arab nationalism. There are so much different ideas and beliefs.
Yeah, I have another question to all of you, but again related to Tuğba's presentation. Here we have a crisis in Lebanon and the one in Iraq too. The issue of whether we have a country based on citizenship and on democracy or a concessional democracy. In Iraq, from 2003 until now, we have been following the Lebanese example. We have a concessional kind of democracy, although the constitution of 2005 does not spells it out in this way, but in reality, we have just like Lebanon. The president is a Kurd, the prime minister is what you call Shia Christian, Shia Muslim, and the head, it's different. But I'm trying to say the positions are also being, to some extent, divided on concessional line. So there is now an identity crisis, Iraqi identity crisis. Some people say, and that's why most of the demonstrations which started in October, which Ibrahim mentioned, they said, let's leave this. Let's think like Iraqis. So the same thing happened in Lebanon. What do you think the future holds for this kind of democracy? Concessional democracy versus a country based on citizenship. What do you think? I don't know whether you got my question or not.
I think country-based citizenship-based democracy is better because people should have solidarity first. Then they have do something. They can do something about other things. I think citizenship is the better.
Okay. Aslıgül, don't you think this will victimize the rights of the minorities? And, I am not hearing you, Aslıgül. Open your microphone. Yes.
I think the problem in the Middle East that people think that they have only one identity. In fact, we have multiple identities. We can, for example, you can be an Iraqi citizens with Shia origin, or you can be a Lebanese citizens with Christian origins. But here, we assume that in the Middle East, these different identities are clashing with each other. But I think that these identities can be complementary to each other. But unfortunately, in the Middle East, these issues are presented as a competitive way, and rather than having multiple identities and rather than have an inclusive approach, unfortunately, in the Middle East, people focus on their think that there's a rivalry, there's a competition between different identities, and unfortunately, we can't solve this problem. This is my approach.
Yeah, thank you very much. And anybody wants to add, Ibrahim, do you want to add on this issue?
No, thank you very much. I tried to mention about what I want to do.
Okay. Mustafa, duymuyorum. Tekrar çekip giriş yap.
By the way, it was my message. I couldn't hear you. That's why I just left it.
Okay. Now I heard it. Okay, guys. Okay. Well, I was very glad to know you. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Dr. Othman ALİ. I am a professor in Sakarya University or URMER, and I've done my PhD in Toronto University long time ago, 1993, and I'm also a professor in Erbil. I specialize mostly on Kurdish questions, and my writings are mostly on that. And it was a pleasure to have you all. And we thank on your behalf, I will thank the staff in URMER for arranging this opportunity for us. Thank you. You all be safe, and may God bless us all.